The phone's cheerful chime said delivered, while the lobby said nothing. Lemon cleaner in the air, vending machine humming, the glass door sealed like a rulebook. And when I tapped the tracking photo, it showed my doorway framed like a trophy. A driver's arm caught mid-snap before he drifted off the curb with a practiced shrug. Cap low, van idling, trusting a picture to do a handshake's job as my chest tightened and my leather folder, receipts, treatment schedule, senior card, suddenly felt heavier than the morning. Across the street, a couple in gym clothes laughed into a camera that would never be asked to prove they existed. And inside, a substitute receptionist searched an empty log while the system stamped archived as if my breath were an optional feature. The kind of arrogance that hides behind policy and leaves the fragile side of the glass to figure out the rest. I didn't argue with the app. I opened the folder, looked up at the lobby camera, and decided to make the rules speak. Before I go on, hit subscribe and tell me where you're listening from. If this speaks to you, share it. Awareness protects our elders. The notification hit my phone with a cheerful chime, and for a second, I stood in my doorway believing the little green word meant something solid, something I could touch, something I could swallow with water at the kitchen sink and feel my chest loosen the way it's supposed to on mornings like this. Then the elevator door slid open onto the lobby, and there was nothing where a package should have been. Only the lemon cleaner smell rising from the tile, the soft thrum of the vending machine by the mailboxes, and a square of cold air leaking under the glass door to the street, as if the building itself were exhaling a tired apology. Delivered, the app said. Delivered, the photo showed. Delivered, my chest repeated, flat and unbelieving, while my eyes scanned a clean strip of floor and found it as empty as a promise said too quickly. I walked to the entry, the automatic door that needs a fob or a buzz to open, and pressed my palm against the cool pane. Outside, the steps were dry, a faint chalky line where someone had dragged a stroller earlier in the morning. I looked for broken tape, a dent in dust, any sign that a box had kissed this spot and left a memory behind. Nothing. The tiny dome camera above the door held its blind glass still, reflecting me back with the warped seriousness of a fisheye mirror, a grandfather in a navy cardigan with his leather folder under his arm, trying not to look old in front of a lens. The emptiness didn't feel like a simple mistake. It felt like procedure stretched thin over indifference. A driver who knows the angle, who leans in for the photo, who lets the app certify what didn't happen. The humiliation was small enough to hide in a polite smile, but it had weight. I could feel it settle between my ribs where the medicine should have settled first. I rested the leather against my hip. The folder smelled faintly of mink oil from the time I conditioned it in spring, and inside it, the paper edges were familiar under my thumb. Treatment schedule, insurance receipts, the senior card I show on buses, a printout from last month when a shipment was delayed and then found. I wanted to trust the ritual. Walk, retrieve, swallow, breathe. But now I was holding ritual without object, a ceremony missing its bread. The door hummed when someone pushed through from the street, a gust of cool air and a coffee smell, conversation rising for a breath, then collapsing back into the low lobby hum. I left the binder open and stepped to the glass again. The outside world was perfectly ordinary. A delivery van double-parked 2 buildings down, a bag of fallen leaves caught near the curb, a bus exhaling at the stop. Ordinary, except the rectangle of my life that should have been in reach was nowhere in sight. The app's photo sat there on my screen, a frame of shiny glass with a blurry shape in the far left corner that could have been the edge of our door or a grocery refrigerator or any metal in America. The timestamp was precise down to the minute. I pinched and zoomed with the big fingers that arthritis tries to steal from me, but the pixels refused to confess. The little green check mark glowed with the confidence of a rubber stamp. I thought of all the times a stamp had pushed my family back or pulled us forward,
county records, school forms, the bus pass I fought to get renewed, and it angered me that this small green stamp could pretend to be the same species as those. I wrote the time down in my notebook anyway. The numbers move better in my head when they're ink on paper. I copied the tracking ID from the app. I wrote our door code policy. No packages left outside glass. All must be handed to a resident or logged at the desk, because rituals keep me in frame when anger tries to take the perimeter. The substitute pulled the visitor laptop around and clicked to the camera feed. The thumbnail showed gray squares with white time codes in their corners. He scrolled back to match the minute on my phone, then clicked. The lobby reappeared inside a rectangle, a slightly paler version of itself. A figure passed with a backpack. The elevator opened, closed. He tried to export. The mouse arrow became a spinning wheel. A modal window popped up asking for an admin passcode. He shook his head with a small, apologetic smile. "Only the manager has that," he said. He looked toward the office where the blinds were slatted and still. "She's in at 9:30, he added, then glanced at the clock above the hallway. 9:08. 9:20 was my first pill. I could feel the ticking now that I'd named it, the way you only notice a refrigerator when it stops. I pressed the leather tight against my arm and breathed the lemon cleaner again. There are worse smells to anchor yourself to. I told the substitute thank you, and he nodded like he wanted to do more, but fear of doing the wrong more held him still. I stepped back to the mail slots and took out the blank print card to remind myself to replace it later. Small tasks keep the blood from boiling. Back upstairs, the kitchen window showed the campus of the school down the block emptying out. Kids in hoodies funneling toward the corner store for candy. I printed the tracking page from my laptop, the words delivered in bold black like a joke. I added it to the top of my stack. The folder's leather creaked the way it does when the spine is overfull. Paper slide like cards when you've handled them long enough, and I could feel each category by touch. Receipts soft as cloth, clinic handouts stiff and smooth, the laminated senior pass with its plastic grain, and the notch the inspector cut when he validated it last year. I put the pass on the counter and tapped it twice with my knuckle. That card represents a contract. I show who I am, they let me ride. A photo should not be able to impersonate that kind of contract. My chest ached at the thought, a slow burn like a warning light more than a fire.
I called the number on the tracking page. A recorded voice thanked me for my patience and promised a better experience. It read my case number back to me in a friendly, robotic whisper. It told me my call might be monitored to improve their service. Then a human answered, and the first human is always kind because it's in the script, and the script works until the part where you ask for something outside is grammar. I explained that the package was marked delivered, that the photo was meaningless because the door requires a fob, that the lobby desk had no record, that the camera might hold the difference between truth and convenience if we could get to it. The human thanked me for my clarity and said she could see the photo and the green check mark and the notation that an attempt had been made to contact me, but no one had answered. I held the phone away from my ear and looked at it the way you look at a misbehaving child. The call log on my screen was sitting there like a neat little field of grass. Nothing had disturbed it. I asked the human what the policy required for a sensitive item. She said she could email me the policy. I told her I already knew the policy because I live inside these policies. They are the walls I bump my elbows on. She paused, then offered to open the case and escalate. I accepted because even a bad letter sometimes gets you a little higher. She read back a long string of numbers and letters. I wrote it on a sticky note and smoothed the edge down with my thumbnail and tucked it behind the track printout like a ticket. I called the pharmacy that hired the delivery company. The line clicked 3 times, and then a song I know from my wife's old radio washed through the speaker, all thin and tinny, like a memory walking down a hallway. When the technician answered, I explained again,
and her voice had the weary courtesy of someone who has learned how to keep their tone gentle so the day will end with fewer cuts. She looked at the order. She said for certain types of medication, the policy required a signature or a return to store for secure pickup if the recipient was unavailable. She said their system showed delivered and a picture on file. I told her I was happy to bring proof, to bring my folder, to stand in front of whoever needed to see and show that a picture cannot sign a name. She said the manager would be in later this morning. She said I could come by and they would look together. I called Maya. My granddaughter answers like a summer runner, breathless and bright, and not afraid to stop when she needs to. "Grandpa, what's up?" she said, and I told her the short version because she knows the long versions by heart. How long we've lived here, how the door works, how the little things become big when medicine is involved. She said, "Send me the photo and the timestamp." My thumbs aren't as quick as hers, but they know their way around now. I sent the screenshot and the tracking page. She texts back with a string of times with colons and periods, the way she formats when she's putting together a pattern. She asked if the building camera keeps the time stamped in the corner. I said it does. She said if I can't export, at least film the monitor with my phone so the digits are visible. She said if I can get a print of the building policy about deliveries, that will help box them in. She said box them in like it was a quiet joke we shared, and it made the edge of the humiliation soften for a second. I told her I was going to the lobby to see if I could get the manager to export and then to the pharmacy with my folder. She said, "Hold on to the paper trail like it's your cane." I said I would. She said she could meet me later if needed after she finished her practice test. I told her to focus on the test because chaos prefers company and I wasn't inviting it in unless it forced itself. She laughed, a small burst, and then was serious again. She reminded me to drink water. I looked at the glass on the counter, the one I'd filled on habit, and took a sip because it's good to let someone take care of you when they ask nicely.
Back in the elevator, the overhead fan made a small, tired sound. The panel lights reflected on the metal doors in a row like bracketed stars. A neighbor with a poodle nodded at me and then at my folder. He asked if everything was all right in a tone that expected me to lie. "Everything is in process," I said, which is the closest to the truth without letting your dignity leak on the floor. The poodle's nails clacked like coins on the tile as they turned the corner. The lemon cleaner smell was stronger now because they had just mopped near the mailboxes. Wet footprints crossed and evaporated in patches. The substitute pushed the binder toward me again, as if the world might have corrected itself in the 5 minutes I was upstairs. It hadn't. He called the manager's extension and held the receiver to his ear, then to his shoulder, then back to his ear. He looked at me and shook his head, a quick little movement like the word sorry if it were a bird. I said, "Could we at least view the window around the timestamp to be sure?" And he turned the monitor toward me. We watched in silence as the seconds in white numbers climbed. Someone came in with grocery bags, a bouquet of parsley sticking out. The elevator doors opened for a woman in a yellow raincoat who smiled at the substitute and then at me and then at the camera without knowing it. Between those ordinary motions, the rectangle of the world held steady and blank in the moment that should have held a driver with a box and a decision to make. I held my phone up and recorded the monitor and felt ridiculous for doing it, like a person filming a TV from their couch. But sometimes ridiculous is the ancestor of proof. The reflection of my cardigan glowed on the glass like a ghost that didn't care about vanity. I whispered the time as the numbers clicked, a habit I picked up to anchor things in my head. I filmed 30 seconds before and after the marked minute. I filmed the little blue bar that showed the camera's health, the way it wavered and then steadied. The substitute said he could email the admin if I wanted, and I said, "Please do, now." We stood there listening to the phone ring on a desk somewhere down the hallway, the ring traveling through drywall like a bug wandering. 9:15. 9:16. In my folder, the treatment schedule sat under my thumb like a steady drum beat. I thought of my wife's voice counting drops when she used to help me before she left this world, and the memory didn't sting. It steadied me. I wrote down that memory too.
Not because it was evidence, but because it was motive, and motive makes a person patient in the ways that matter. When the admin didn't answer, the substitute typed an email with the subject, "Video export urgent," and attached a photo of the screen where the time danced. He copied the building manager and the property management account. He read me what he wrote to be sure it was accurate, and it was. I could trust the correctness of his nouns. Then he leaned in and tapped another window. A system info page opened with lines and bars that meant more to him than to me. At the bottom, a note in small text said storage nearing capacity, on overwrite mode. Oldest segments purged by priority. Export requires admin authorization. He pointed to a line with the current date, to a block of gray that nudged forward, to a tiny triangle blinking like a cautious heartbeat. He said it didn't mean the clip would disappear right now, but it meant the system was indifferent to the difference between one day and the next, because that's what systems are built to be unless a human tells them otherwise. I looked at that indifference blinking there and felt another wave of humiliation, the quiet kind that makes your shoulders feel heavier. Procedure is supposed to protect the fragile parts of a life. When it doesn't, it needs to answer to someone, even if that someone is just a man with a folder and a calm voice.
I called the delivery number again and gave them the incident string. The second human on the line had a supervisor cadence, slower and less musical. He said he could see the photo and the delivery stamp and an automated note that the driver attempted contact and waited outside. I told him my building door requires a fob and that any waiting would have been visible on the camera if there had been a human there. I told him I was in front of that camera right now, and the rectangle had recorded people with parsley and small dogs and yellow coats and nobody with a box at the minute his system labeled. He said he would make a note. I asked if the driver's route had a GPS track. He said he could not share route information for privacy and security reasons. I said I understood reasons. I live in a world of reasons. But we were dealing with medicine, and medicine is its own kind of security. He said he would escalate to logistics and call me back. I wrote his name down and the time he promised to call. The substitute cleared his throat and showed me the binder again, like a talisman, as if maybe the order of ink on paper could conjure a box from air. I put my palm flat on the page and felt its matte drag. I wrote my unit number and the word "no delivery" at 9:08 with my own pen, and then in parentheses the thought I wanted recorded in the simplest English I could manage. Door requires fob. Photo is not proof. I closed the binder gently. The hiss of the vacuum mop down the hallway sounds like surf in the distance. I flipped my folder open and placed the tracking printout face up and the senior card beside it. Not for effect, but because I wanted to see all the contracts on the table at once. The one the app pretended to keep and the one that a person at a counter had looked me in the eye and issued. I slid out last month's receipt where a similar delivery had been signed for by me and pressed that ink beside the word "delivered" on today's page, just to let my eyes compare what truth looks like in two forms. The truth with a signature has edges you can follow. The truth with a photo is a fog that lets shortcuts look like bridges. Outside, a siren moaned and faded. A truck downshifted on the avenue. On my phone, the battery icon slipped from green to a more serious shade, and I imagined the day draining with it if I let it. I told the substitute I'd be in the lobby until the manager arrived. He nodded like a soldier at a small personal war. I walked to the low armchairs that nobody ever sits in for long because they're designed for appearances, and I sat. The vinyl made a small sigh under me and warmed slowly through my sweater. I set the folder on my knees, opened it, and rearranged the papers, because order is how I keep fear from climbing. Treatment schedule, tracking page, senior card, receipt with signature, notebook with times. I took a breath and felt the breath move through my chest the way I wished the medicine did when it was right on time, swift and honest.
The monitor above the desk shifted to a different view. The parking entry, then the elevator bank, then back to the front door, and in the top corner, a countdown badge rotated into view with a gentle, indifferent blink that the substitute said marked the system's overwrite cycle as it crept toward the hour that could swallow the minute I needed. The badge kept pulsing in the corner of the screen like a heartbeat that didn't care if I lived or died. And the substitute shifted his weight from one foot to the other as though his shoes had grown a size. He said the manager usually came through the revolving door at 9:30 with a key card and a to-go cup that smelled like almond syrup. I watched the sweep hand on the wall clock slide and tried to teach my breath to match it. My folder lay open on my lap like a patient waiting for stitches.
When she arrived, it was exactly the way he said. A small wind of cologne, keys chiming, a paper cup with a brown sleeve. She took in the screen and the binder and my open folder the way a nurse takes in a crowded room. And the substitute explained, careful and concise, while I added the part about the door being impossible to open without a fob. She nodded once, set down the cup, and typed the password with the economy of someone who believes passwords exist to be used for the right reasons. The modal window accepted her, and the export panel opened like a stubborn cabinet finally given. The choices in front of us were square and plain. Select camera, select time, choose file format. The manager asked for the minute I needed. I gave it and asked for 2 minutes on either side. The substitute clicked. A little progress bar scraped forward at a pace meant to test convictions. The DVR whirred and a soft fan current warmed the underside of my fingers. I could hear the elevator cables moving inside the shaft like a low cello. A man with a toolbox stepped in from the street, smelled like metal and rain even though the sky was clear. The smell reached me and woke up a memory of being small in a kitchen where my father repaired a radio that had been half smashed by a careless neighbor, and how he'd said in a voice as flat as a table that tools are just hands with better patience. The export hit 20% and stopped. A rectangle popped up with a red icon and words I didn't know. The substitute grimaced. The manager leaned closer. "It wants a different drive," he said. "Something about file system compatibility." She looked for a portable disk. He produced a thumb drive with a plastic crack where the cap should be. He plugged it in. The system refused it like a picky eater. He tried again. The same red icon blinked like a traffic signal that thinks you aren't really there. I held the folder tighter against my thighs to keep from standing up and pacing, because pacing changes nothing but the position of your soles. My phone buzzed. A message from the delivery company had the tone of a happy weather forecast. It thanked me for my patience again, informed me a supervisor had been notified, and assured me an attempted contact had been recorded at the time of delivery. I looked at the call log on my screen, empty as a field after harvest, and felt heat crawl up my neck in a slow, disciplined wave. I wrote the message down with the timestamp, then wrote the words "no call received" in my small block letters and underlined them twice. Underlining is the paper version of raising your eyebrows. The manager opened a drawer and handed the substitute another thumb drive, still in its plastic, and that one the system liked. It scanned it, hummed, and then the same red rectangle appeared again with newer words. The substitute said it wanted the drive to be formatted a certain way, something older, something simple. He started to click through a menu to make it happen, but the option was gray, and a new message told him he didn't have privileges to change device settings. He looked at the manager, who sighed the way people sigh when they know they're right, but have to prove it to a machine anyway. And she typed another string of characters.
The option turned black. She clicked, and the computer asked if we were sure we wanted to erase everything on this drive. She said yes without drama, because some decisions are just a path, not a speech. The elevator doors opened and closed twice like quiet lungs. Somewhere down the hall, someone's voice rose and fell in a single-sided phone conversation. The lemon cleaner smell had drifted, replaced by a dry papery scent from the printer behind the desk as it fed envelopes. The export restarted. The bar crawled to 12%, 23, 40, stalled, nudged forward, stalled again. Each small push brought me close to wanting to applaud. Instead, I counted my breaths.
Maya texted that she was on her way, already on the sidewalk with her sneakers flat on the ground, the way she always reminded me to keep my balance. She walked in a few minutes later with hair pulled back and a hoodie that smelled faintly of soap and the last class she'd been in. She touched my shoulder, then looked at the screen. Without asking, she pulled her own thumb drive from her backpack. It was clean, silver, with a hole for a lanyard. She asked the manager if we could make 2 copies for redundancy, one onto theirs and one onto hers. The manager said that was fine. Maya leaned over the keyboard like a pianist approaching a difficult measure. She clicked the drop-down for file type and selected the standard option she knew the most phones could read. She set the export range again, 2 minutes before and after, and then, thinking ahead, added a short clip of the minute prior, just in case anyone tried to argue about context. My phone buzzed again, a different tone. The pharmacy had sent an automated email confirming the order was delivered and asking me to rate the experience on a 5-star scale. It took effort not to laugh, the kind of laugh that leaves salt in your mouth. I saved the email as a PDF because paper holds better than air. I printed it upstairs and brought it right back down and folded it into the folder in front of the tracking page. The folder creaked. The sound felt like a hinge finally remembering its own purpose. Maya glanced at the print and gave me a look that said, "We're building a bridge, one board at a time." The progress bar ticked forward like a cautious insect, and the DVR fan's warmth gathered at my wrist. Maya explained to the manager in calm, neutral words why the 2-minute buffer mattered, how clock drift could be used by someone to cast doubt, how we needed both a standard file and a copy of the proprietary one in case any difference in compression became a debate. The manager didn't argue. She nodded and nodded again, and I watched her shoulders let go of their armor one notch at a time. That's all I ask of people in their roles. Loosen the armor long enough to remember the person beneath it. When the first export reached 100%, the system chimed a little note and then offered a save dialog with a default name full of numbers. Maya renamed it with the date and camera identifier and the minute range. She added a hyphen and the word lobby so nobody could pretend it was something else. She ejected the drive the polite way, waited for the OK, then plugged in her own. The system recognized it right away. She formatted it to match. The second export moved faster, as if the machine had decided it could trust us. I am old enough to remember when trusting a machine was a joke. Now it feels like one of the few ways to live with them. While the second copy wrote, my phone hummed with a new message from the delivery number. It told me the driver had marked the package as placed in a secure location and that a photo had been captured in compliance with policy. I wrote those exact words down and then wrote beside them the sentence, Secure location requires access, and my building door does not grant access without the living agreement of a human. I do not know if writing sentences like that changes the world, but I know it changes me. It makes me stand up straighter inside my own skin. The manager printed a short report from the system that showed the camera's uptime and the exact span of footage we'd exported. She signed at the bottom with a dry pen that scratched like sand. She stamped it with the building's little ink stamp with our address. The stamp made a sound that reminded me of simpler offices, of carbon paper and metal trays. She handed it to me, and I placed it right after the tracking printout, aligning their edges. Maya opened her laptop and created a spreadsheet. She typed in columns for source, timestamp, file name, description. She added rows, DVR lobby clip 0858 to 0912, delivery app photo 0908, phone call to delivery support 0920, pharmacy email 0934. Her fingers moved fast, but her face was calm. Calm is a kind of generosity.
The second export chimed ready. Maya clicked the little triangle to safely remove the drive and slid it into a pocket inside her backpack I hadn't noticed before. She asked the manager if we could also take a short clip from the camera pointed directly at the door mechanism, just the stretch that included the alleged delivery minute. The manager agreed without hesitation now, and the substitute navigated to the right camera. The angle was tighter, the view more technical. The glass door sensor lights blinked in a language of their own. Maya set the range. The system sighed, as if bored of proving its worth, and did as it was asked. I called the pharmacy from the lobby couch so their record would have this time and this place attached to it in my mind. The technician answered with her tired courtesy, and I explained that we now had video of the minute in question, that we had a report from the building on door operation, that their policy for sensitive deliveries required actual human receipt. She says she would open an incident and mark it for review by a supervisor, and that the manager would be in by late morning. She gave me an incident number, the way a doctor gives a patient a label that doesn't change the pain but allows it to be filed. I wrote the number down and repeated it back once to make the ink stay. Maya sat down beside me and showed me the spreadsheet. The grid looked like a small city built on rules. We added a column for who holds the original, who holds the copy, and a column for notes about chain of custody. She smiled when I said chain of custody in my flat voice, and I smiled back because sometimes words with weight help you carry other burdens too. She asked if we wanted to upload the clips now to a cloud folder, and I said yes, because clouds are still better than single machines when the day is pushing against you. She connected to the building's guest Wi-Fi, entered the rotating code from the placard, frowned when it failed, and then asked the manager for a temporary code. The manager provided it without making us feel like we were asking for a favor. We uploaded the files. The progress circle spun and spun, then clicked complete. Maya copied the share links into the spreadsheet and wrote private access granted to building manager, me, Maya. The overlight badge on the monitor had marched a little further through its circle, but our clips were safe now, preserved in 2 pockets and 1 cloud. We had the kind of proof that keeps a person from being told his memory invented the gap. My body loosened, but not all the way. My chest still missed the medicine the way a mouth misses water when you've been speaking too long. I checked the time. The morning was edging toward the hour where a person has to choose between sitting and moving. I told Maya I was going to the pharmacy. She said she would walk with me for the first few blocks and then peel off for her practice test and meet me later if I needed her. That small promise put a steadying hand between my shoulder blades. We stepped out. The day had warmed by a degree you can only feel on your cheeks.
The street smelled like bread from the bakery near the corner and cut grass from the median. A bus sighed at the stop, the doors folding like a slow book. I waved to a driver I recognized, and he lifted his chin in the way working people greet each other when words would cost both of you time. The delivery van from earlier was gone. In its place, a contractor's truck sat with ladders like two crossbones on top. I took all this in without ceremony, because this is the neighborhood I built a life in, and the world keeps moving even when one box refuses to meet a hand.
Maya asked if I wanted to call the delivery company again while we walked. I did. I gave the incident number to a new voice, one with a scripted comb that could sell insurance or apologies. He read back the notes. He repeated that a driver had left the package in a secure location in accordance with policy, and that a photo had been captured. I told him we had captured something too, that the secure location was the wrong preposition because you cannot secure outside what is inside by design. He said he would note that. He said logistics would review the route data. I asked if they could send me the route data. He said for privacy reasons they could not. He said the supervisor would call me within an hour. I wrote that down and wrote the hour beside it and drew a small square next to it to check later if the call came. I turned that square into a ritual. Squares next to promises. Maya peeled off at the library corner with a squeeze of my elbow. She told me to text her when I reached the pharmacy, when I had a name and a plan. She told me to drink water, and if I felt lightheaded, to sit. I told her I've survived more mornings than the building has cameras. I know how to sit. She laughed, because humor is how we keep the world from rusting. I watched her cross at the light, her backpack kneed against her shoulders, and I felt a surge of stubborn tenderness, the kind that makes you promise yourself you will finish this even if it takes the rest of your kindness to do it. The pharmacy sat 2 blocks further, bright and clean with a sign that always needed one more letter replaced. Inside, the air held a clean alcohol bite and a warmer smell from the tiny coffee cart near the back where a barista milk steamed for 2 regulars in reflective vests. The overhead speakers played a song from 10 years ago about starting over. A mother lifted a toddler into a grocery cart seat and buckled him in with a click that echoed across the tiles. I went straight to the counter and waited a respectful space back from a woman picking up a prescription. A cashier in a navy smock directed me to a small kiosk where you check in for pharmacy services. I typed my name, my date of birth, the order number. The screen asked me to confirm my address, which it already knew. I confirmed it like you do when a clerk asks you to repeat what a clerk already has in front of them. The machine thanked me for confirming myself. A technician glanced up from behind the plexiglass and motioned that she would be with me shortly. While I waited, I set my folder on the counter and arranged the top layer in the order I wanted to tell it: policy, tracking printout, building report, device export, spreadsheet. I did not rehearse anger. I rehearsed sequence. Sequence is the language procedures respect. The overhead light buzzed once and settled. A cart squeaked past with boxes of blood pressure cuffs and glucose strips. A clock above the immunization station showed the same minute my phone showed, and I felt the small comfort of clocks agreeing. The technician called me forward. She asked for the order number and the name on the prescription. I gave them to her, let the numbers land like luggage on a belt. She typed, eyes flicking along a screen I couldn't see. My phone pulsed. A new message from the delivery company surfaced like a fish. Case status updated. I tapped it open and felt the cold rush start in my chest before my eyes even finished reading the first line. On the pharmacy kiosk screen, a banner blinked in friendly green at the top of my profile. Resolved. Archived.
The green banner on the kiosk felt like a small door closing in my face while everyone else kept walking through. An official smile saying the matter had been peacefully buried with a shovel I hadn't touched. I stood very still so the anger wouldn't move my hands. The technician at the counter saw my eyes flick up to the word archived, and something in her posture softened, the way a nurse relaxes one shoulder to make room for a person's fear. I told her quietly that the case could not be resolved because I hadn't received the medication and that I had a folder to prove it. She looked down at the screen where the green banner pulsed once and then rested, and she said in a steady voice that she would reopen the ticket from her end and call for a supervisor. I slid the folder onto the counter. The leather, warmed by my lap in the walk, gave off its faint oil smell, and the papers inside made that dry whisper every time I moved a page to the left or to the right. I placed the tracking printout on top and the small building report with its stamp and the spreadsheet that Maya had made, the grid lines crisp like a very polite fence. I didn't rush. I have learned that haste convinces no one who does not already want to be convinced. The technician, her badge said Jenna, read the first page without touching it. The queue behind me shifted and let out a collective reasonable breath, the kind strangers make when time thickens in front of them. The overhead speaker announced a price check in some other aisle, and then returned to a song about silver linings that made my lips press together in a thin line, amused and not amused. Jenna typed something, squinting a little at her screen. She told me the system would not let her change a resolved status without creating a new incident that referenced the old one. I said, fine, write a new number, tie them together, make a rope. She asked for my permission to attach documents to the incident. I said yes, and she printed a consent form with lines to initial so the words would belong to me once they moved from my mouth to their file. My pen hovered for a second at the spot where I was supposed to give them permission to use my information to make the problem right, and I initialed because there are times in life when you hand a person the key and hope they go to the room they're supposed to. She scanned the form into the system, the scanner light sliding green under my name like a miniature sunrise. Another technician passed behind her carrying a stack of orange bins. He glanced at my folder and at the building report, and then looked away with the trained discretion of someone who has found safety in neutrality. Jenna paged the supervisor. The intercom voice repeated the request for a supervisor at pharmacy consult, and then repeated it again like a polite echo. I stood there listening to the hum of fluorescent lights, their faint insect sound, and the gentle hiss of the milk steamer at the coffee cart. A child in a dinosaur sweatshirt swung his legs in a cart seat and made a noise that was almost a laugh and almost a protest, and his mother touched his shoe with 2 fingers until he quieted. A woman with a lanyard and a clipboard appeared at my left, a pen lodged in her bun like a utensil someone forgot to put back. She introduced herself with the easy rhythm of someone used to being the final word on minor things. I said my name and didn't offer more because my folder would speak. She read the banner on the kiosk and frowned at it in an almost personal way. She asked Jenna to pull up the incident, then the prior one. She asked me to summarize, and I gave her the bones. A photo where a signature belongs, a door that cannot accept ghosts, and a camera that kept the minute the app pretended to own. She asked if I had the footage. I said we had exported it and could provide a copy or a link. She asked if the building would allow them to view it. I said I had permission. The report and a link on the spreadsheet were there. She nodded, and I watched her decide whether to be a guardrail or a bridge.
The line behind me had grown. A man cleared his throat in that pointed, democratic way. The supervisor glanced up and then back, and I saw her balance the math of a floor, one complicated problem holding many simple ones hostage.
She asked if we could step to the consultation window to the right so she could work without the weight of the line breathing on our necks. I moved, not because I wanted to get out of anyone's way, but because I wanted these pages to be read with air around them. The consultation area smelled a little sweeter, maybe because it was closer to the card aisle with its paper and ink and plastic ribbons. I would have smiled at the thought if the green banner weren't still sitting in my peripheral vision. Maya texted that she could swing by after her practice test ended earlier than planned, that she was 10 minutes out if the buses were kind, and that she had the second thumb drive in her pocket. My chest eased by a notch. I told her we had a supervisor looking into it and that the system had mistakenly closed my case. She wrote back with exactly 4 words that placed both anger and patience on the same shelf. "Hold your line, Grandpa." I put the phone face down on the counter because hearing that and also seeing it made me feel steadier. Jenna printed the delivery policy. The paper slid out warm, smelling faintly of toner. She put a yellow highlights across 2 lines. Sensitive items require hand-to-hand transfer with identity verification. If recipient unavailable, return item to store for secure pickup. The word secure felt heavier in ink than it had in a text message that tried to flatten it. I placed that sheet at the front right before the tracking page where delivered glowed with its smug certainty. The supervisor asked for permission to call logistics at the delivery company while I was present. I said yes and took a sip from the paper cone cup Jenna had offered, the water cool enough to remind me I had a body that needed tending, not just a folder that needed opening. She dialed, introduced herself, gave a store number and my incident number, and asked to speak to someone who could discuss a protocol exception. The person on the other end used the kind of language that is meant to give shape to air. "Reviewing now. Please hold while I pull the file. We appreciate your patience. We value our partners. We're seeing the photo on our dashboard." The supervisor said the photo was not proof in the case of a door requiring access. She said she had policy in hand and that a signature was required for sensitive items. She spoke without drama. The voice on the other end asked if they could conference in a logistics coordinator. That phrase fell into my ear like a coin clicking down a payphone slot. I nodded, because nodding is sometimes what a person can do before the next layer of a day reveals itself. While they waited for the coordinator, the supervisor asked if we could attach my building's report. Jenna scanned it. The scanner sang its low, even note again. The coordinator joined and spoke with the cheerful fatalism of a person whose job is to move boxes in anguish through the digital corridors. He asked for the incident number again. He repeated that their driver had left the package in a secure location per policy. The supervisor said we needed to define secure with respect to doors designed to keep strangers out. He offered to send me a replacement. I said the replacement would also need a signature, and more than that, we needed to correct the record because it named me as a person who had been delivered to, when in fact I had been bypassed. He said the record could be amended after a review. He suggested an internal review within 72 hours. 72 hours laid itself across my chest like a heavy coat on a humid day. I said my medication has a rhythm that doesn't recognize their 72 hours. The supervisor, to her credit, didn't let the coordinator declare the conversation finished. She suggested a short-term solution: immediate reissue for pickup at store with identity check, and in parallel, a formal review since the policy appeared to have been ignored. The coordinator paused and then said he would need approval from his compliance team, and perhaps the simplest route would be to handle this as an exception at the store level, if the store manager agreed to annotate. He said the driver would be asked to provide a statement. Humiliation doesn't always shout. Sometimes it moves in like a tenant who pays on time and then tells you which chair you can use. Being told I could have an exception if I asked nicely, instead of the policy being honored because it exists to be honored, fit into that quiet kind. I watched the supervisor draft an email to her regional manager as she spoke to logistics, explaining the situation in clean bullets, copying a compliance address I couldn't see. I wrote the time down. I wrote the names I heard. I wrote the room we were standing in and the smell of toner and coffee and card aisle sugar, because memory works with specificity, and I wanted to be fair to the day when I retold it to myself. Maya arrived like a small weather change, a pocket of clarity moving across the floor. She touched my elbow and said hi to Jenna and the supervisor with the respectful brightness that makes strangers like you before they know if you'll cost them time. She opened her backpack and set her laptop down, the small hinge sound neat and exact, then slid the silver drive onto the counter like a card in a quiet game. She asked the supervisor if we could attach digital copies through the incident portal. The supervisor said the portal took PDFs and sometimes video links if they weren't too large. Maya offered a compressed copy and a link to the full file in the cloud with access limited to whomever the supervisor invited. The supervisor's posture changed again, looser. She told Maya she appreciated the organization. Maya said it was nothing. This is just how Grandpa likes to do it. And I felt that word like a pat on the inside of my chest. We added the link. We attached the building report and the tracking printout and the policy page Jenna had highlighted. Maya opened her spreadsheet and added another row with the new incident number and the names of the supervisor and the coordinator. She typed with her shoulders relaxed and her wrists straight, and I thought of my wife, who used to correct my posture with a gentle hand between my shoulder blades when I pretended to forget what years had taught me. The memory didn't hurt. It put strength back in my spine. The supervisor set the receiver down and said the coordinator was asking if we could schedule a short review later that morning with someone from logistics and compliance, preferably on site so they could see the documents and, if permitted, the video footage. She said their compliance person could be available within an hour. She asked if I could stay. I said I would stay as long as my legs allowed, and when they didn't, I would sit in that chair over there and still be present. She smiled, without saying the word brave, because brave is a word you earn in different rooms. Jenna printed a small sign to put at her station, apologizing for the delay and pointing customers to another window. The line behind me loosened its tension and flowed toward the next person with a register. A man in a ball cap muttered something not unkind about bureaucracy, and I pretended not to hear, because not everything a person says in a line is meant to be a weapon. Maya asked if I needed water. I did. She brought it without asking twice. The paper cup flexed against my fingers like a small animal trying to jump and then deciding against it. The supervisor said she would need the store manager to sign off on the meeting because it would take place in the consultation room and might involve back-of-house staff. She disappeared behind the swinging door. The door's hinge made a sound like a fork on a ceramic plate. I watched a customer choose a sympathy card, read the front, put it back, choose a different one, read the front again, and nod as if the words on that second card had finally aligned with their private weather. The coffee steamer hissed, the smell of toasted bagel floated in and then lost itself in the larger pharmacy smell of alcohol and plastic. The store manager came out with the supervisor and introduced himself, extending a hand that was clean and dry and carried no rush in it. He asked me to walk him through the timeline once more. I did, pausing at the places that matter, the door that needs a fob, the minute that didn't exist on the footage, the photo that pretended to be a signature. He nodded and said that, pending the compliance person's arrival, we could hold a brief review in the back office where there was a larger monitor. He looked at Jenna and said to make sure the front stayed covered. He looked at the supervisor and said to make sure everyone who needed to be there was on the call or in the room. Maya asked if we could bring our own laptop to mirror the video in case their system didn't like our format. The manager said that would be helpful. He asked how long the clip was. Maya said a few minutes on either side. He said good, because he had half an hour before a conference call and needed to stay on schedule. I wrote that half hour down, not because half hours obey plans, but because naming them makes you respect the clock you're trying to use. The humiliation still did its slow drill behind my breastbone, but now it had something else to bump into. A structure where a person could point to a rule and say that rule matters, even when a photo thinks it can stand in for contact. I let myself breathe as if the room were bigger. Maya touched my shoulder again and asked if I wanted her to call the building admin to make sure the link wouldn't expire. I said yes. She stepped aside, dialed, spoke in that evenly polite way she inherited from a line of women who knew how to move a day without bruising it. The supervisor returned and said logistics and compliance was sending representatives over, that they preferred in-person review when medication was involved because it cleared the fog more quickly. She said the person from logistics was already nearby finishing a route check and would arrive first, and that the compliance rep would follow. She said she would log this as a formal review connected to both the prior and new incidents. She said they would ask the driver to provide a statement. I resisted the urge to ask whether a statement in air was worth any more than a photo, because there are times when sarcasm is a poor investment. We waited. Waiting is something my bones know how to do. They just don't like doing it under bright lights. The chair in the consultation alcove had a narrow seat that made my knees ask questions. Maya pulled a second chair closer so I could rest one hand on the back like a rail, and I loved her for knowing I prefer to stand, even when sitting would be easier, because dignity doesn't understand chairs. She adjusted the brightness on her laptop so the screen wouldn't sting my eyes. She tested the video link. It played with the tiny stutter that always appears the first time, then smoothed out. A woman from the card aisle asked the technician about envelopes. The barista called out 2 cappuccinos. A boy knocked over a display of toothbrushes and apologized to the floor. Life didn't know it was being held on a small pause in our corner. My phone stayed quiet, which made me think of the promises I had put little squares beside. I ticked none of them yet. I wrote the time again slower, letting the digits lengthen the page.
Then the automatic doors sighed. A man in a gray jacket with a badge on a retractable reel stepped through, followed by a taller man in a logistics polo with a tablet under his arm, and the gray jacket man scanned the room the way people do when they're looking for the person who will cost them an hour they didn't budget. They took 2 steps, and I recognized the tilt of a shoulder and the careful way a person who knows the tricks of photos angles his body away from cameras, and I felt the air narrow to a line I could walk without touching the sides, because the driver, who had tapped the phone in front of a closed door, was here. If this is reaching you, leave a like, share your thoughts in the comments, and send it to a friend who cares. They stood a few paces inside the automatic doors, blinking away the pharmacy light the way you do when you move from street to fluorescent. And the man with the badge did the scanning a person does when they're looking for the complaint that has their name on it. The logistics man kept one hand on the tablet like it might change shape if he eased his grip. The driver hung back half a step, cap brim low, jacket zipped to the throat in a room that wasn't cold. He had the careful stillness of someone who believes motion is an admission. The store manager approached first, shoulders squared to let the room know the ground belonged to him, and introduced people in a clean list that put function before names. The badge man was compliance. The tablet man was logistics. The driver was the driver on the route at the minute my app call delivered. I gathered my folder and the printed policy Jenna had highlighted and the building report with the stamp and followed them to the consultation room, which had a longer table than it needed and chairs that looked like they were designed by committee.
The room smelled faintly of antiseptic, copier heat, and whatever polish they used on laminated wood to convince it that it was older than it was. The manager asked if we could use the back office instead, bigger monitor, fewer interruptions, and I nodded because this wasn't a parade to perform, it was work to be done in quiet air. We moved through a half door and down a short hallway where the lights hummed in a thinner tone. In the office, a computer sat under a wide screen that reflected us as a fog before it woke. A corkboard on the wall held schedules and a motivational flyer about courtesy that made my mouth twitch, not unkindly. The manager pulled out chairs. The compliance officer set a slender notebook on the table with a pen that clicked too easily. The logistics man woke his tablet, the screen banded with route blocks and timestamps that he tilted away from casual eyes. The driver took the end of the table as if the end might be farther from whatever gravity we were about to apply. Maya set her laptop near the keyboard and asked if we could mirror to the big screen. The manager said yes and handed her an HDMI cable with tape around one end like a bandage. She connected, and the pharmacy logo bloomed on the screen before shrinking to make room for the desktop. She opened the folder with the exported clips, the file names neat with their date-time ranges. She placed the spreadsheet on the table, aligned with the building report so their edges confessed they'd been designed by different minds. Compliance began with procedures the way a conductor raises a baton. He said they were here to review the facts, to compare records, to determine if policy had been followed, and if not, to document the variance and the corrective action. He said his role wasn't to assign blame, but to look at paths and to repair them when they led people to the wrong door. He asked me to describe in my own words what I had experienced from the moment the notification appeared. I gave him the morning like a measured line. The chime, the empty towel, the lemon cleaner, the camera that saw ordinary minutes around the one that mattered, the phone logs that were grass without footprints, the building door that only opens to hands with permission. I handed him the policy page Jenna highlighted and did not decorate it with adjectives. The nouns were weight enough.
Logistics nodded and said he would cross-check the timeline against the route's recorded activity. He tapped his tablet and frowned, as if a number had shifted his hat. He said he could confirm the driver's device, took a photo at the building coordinates at the minute stated, and that the route's GPS showed a stop duration of less than a minute. He emphasized that their policy allowed drivers to place packages in secure locations when recipients were unavailable. I pointed to the highlighted line on Jenna's print and said that for sensitive items, their policy required hand-to-hand transfer or a return to store. He said he saw that now, and his tone kept its smoothness, even as the word required made a quiet dent in it. The driver kept his hands folded on the table, knuckles pale. Compliance turned to him and asked if he could walk us through his actions in his own words. He looked at the table's laminate and said he followed his app. The address matched. The building looked secure. He approached the glass. He took the photo to confirm presence. He knocked. He waited a few beats. He marked delivered. He said the schedule spooled tight on his screen, and the morning had been running behind, and leaving a package in a secure spot was better than taking it back, because taking it back meant someone in a different room later telling him he'd wasted fuel and time. I watched his mouth and thought I could hear the script behind his words, the small places where his voice pressed against enlisted habit. I did not hate him. I hate the part of a system that calls 1 minute heroic, when heroic is a person waiting long enough to meet another person's eyes. I placed my senior card on the table beside the papers, not because it proved anything about delivery, but because it reminded the room who policy should be designed around. The card's plastic edge clicked lightly against the table when I let it go, a tiny metronome. Maya's presence next to me changed the room's shape. She asked, not sharply, whether there had been any attempt to contact my phone. Logistics said the system showed a note that an attempt had been made. I pushed my phone forward with the call log open.
a narrow list of real contacts, no unknown numbers at the time in question. Compliance looked at the log, then at logistics. He asked logistics to print the route event detail for that minute. Logistics hesitated, said those prints were internal, then glanced at the manager and decided paper counted as air when it stayed in the room. He printed. The page slid out smelling like plastic and heat, and he placed it on the table. In a column labeled Customer Contact, a code that meant Not Attempted set like a pebble everyone had been pretending not to feel in their shoe. Logistics pinched the bridge of his nose for a flicker and then smoothed his face back into neutrality. We established the clocks. Compliance asked for the time on the office computer. The manager read it aloud. Maya read the time on her laptop. I read the time on my phone. They matched within a second, and compliance wrote that down in a hand that was square and almost old-fashioned. He asked to see the building report showing that the door hadn't opened at the minute the app claimed. I slid it forward. He read it, gently, the way you handle a document someone has carried like a shoulder, and nodded once. He asked if we had authority to share the camera clip for limited review. Maya opened the cloud link and generated a password that meant something to her and me and nothing to anyone else. Compliance copied the link and the password into his notebook with his square hand, and logistics wrote them more quickly as if speed could change content.
Then came the part where rooms like this decide whether they are human. Compliance proposed we watch the clip together and take notes without speaking over the frames. He requested that the driver watch as a witness to the minute his app claimed and that logistics note any discrepancy between the device's record and the lived image. The manager dimmed the overhead lights a notch. The air conditioner clicked and held. Maya set the clip to play but paused at the first frame so compliance could verify that the timestamp in the corner matched the format on the building report. He traced the digits with his pen like a person confirming a serial number on a piece of equipment before signing it out. He said, "Proceed." We watched the minute before to give the world context. A neighbor stepped through the door using a fob. The sensor lights blinked, the door opened, the world performed as engineered. The driver's seat at the end of the table was a small continent of stillness. Then the minute. The camera's view held steady on the glass door, the interior reflection delicate as tissue paper, the exterior steps with that chalky line where morning strollers marked their path. There was no human at the door in that frame. There was a shadow on the far left that could have been a tree shift, and the hum in the room felt louder because silence always makes machines bold. The minute ended. The minute after showed a woman with a backpack entering, the door accepting her like a correct answer. Compliance asked to replay and then to slow. Maya did it. We looked for motions in the pane, for a hand entering, for the edge of a box. Nothing new appeared. Logistics wrote notes in a block style of his own, faster than compliance's squares, his lips moving the math I couldn't hear. The driver's shoulders tightened when the slowed frame held the empty doorway like a held breath. He didn't speak. I didn't ask him to. We did not reach for drama. We set the clip aside and moved through the other documents like people laying tools on a cloth. Maya printed thumbnails of the video frames at the minute in question, with timestamps visible, because even in a room of screens, paper calms storms. Jenna brought them in with the quiet touch of someone joining a conversation they aren't officially part of. I placed the tracking printout beside the thumbnails, the green delivered, reading like a word that had wandered into the wrong sentence. The supervisor joined us, stood behind the manager's chair, and watched without interruption. We closed small loops. The building manager emailed Maya while we sat there, confirming that the export authorization for the clip would remain valid for a week, and that any additional minutes we needed could be provided on request. Maya read the email aloud in a calm voice and added the note to the spreadsheet.
then slid her finger down to the squares next to promises and filled in one with a tiny check. Logistics received a text from someone in his office asking for an update, and he replied with a line that sounded like he was stepping through fog. On-site review underway. Evidence includes building video and policy reference. The driver's phone stayed face down. I respected that. Compliance asked the supervisor to describe the store's process for handling exceptions when delivery fails for sensitive items. She explained the secure pickup option, the identity check at the counter, the documentation that follows. She said they would have been happy to do that if the record had not shown delivered and archived. She said the archive had closed their door before anyone reached for the handle. Compliance wrote those words as if words could keep a door from doing that again. The manager asked Jenna to print the exception process flowchart. She did. The paper came out with a soft curl and settled into the room's gravity. The air felt less tight, not because anything had been resolved, but because we had gathered the pieces into a shape that could bear weight. I thought of my wife then, how she used to set her sewing supplies in a neat ring around whatever needed mending before she made the first stitch, and how she'd say, "The cloth already knows what it wants when you listen long enough." I breathed that memory in without sadness. It made my ribs remember what air is for.
Maya asked if we should also capture my phone's call log as a screenshot for the record. Compliance said yes. She held the phone screen beside the office monitor's clock so the time would be visible in the same frame, and she took the picture. She printed it with the small portable printer she carries in her backpack for school projects, the paper warm and faintly chemical. She labeled it "Call Log, No Attempts at Delivery Time," and slid it into a plastic sleeve. She placed the sleeve on the table. I felt proud of the sleeve for existing. The supervisor suggested we move the review to the conference room for a final consolidation once the compliance colleague from their corporate office arrived, since the room had better lighting and enough chairs for anyone who needed to witness. The manager checked his watch and said he had 15 minutes before a call, but could stay to open the room and set the screen. Logistics agreed. Compliance agreed. He asked that no conclusions be voiced until all present had seen the same documents. That restraint felt like respect. We stood, and my knees asked their usual questions. Maya answered them with a small pressure at my elbow. We filed down the hallway again. The automatic doors out front sighed for someone else's business. In the conference room, a whiteboard leaned forward as if eager. The manager switched the screen input, and the pharmacy logo returned, modest in a corner. Compliance arranged his notebook and the policy page Jenna had highlighted, angled so the yellow lines shone like lines on a map that finally met their river. Logistics placed his printed route event detail beside the tablet as if paper might convince the tablet to behave. I took the chair closest to the screen, not because I needed to, but because I like to be near the thing that will carry the truth. Maya sat to my right, the laptop ready, the clips cued again, the password written on a sticky note in tidy characters. The supervisor stood by the door and told a cashier through a crack in the jamb to send anyone here for immunizations to window 3 for the next half hour. The room adjusted itself to this small purpose like a hand clears a table for a meal. Before we began again, I opened my folder and put my senior card at the top. I traced its edges once with my thumb. The leather under my forearms warmed to my skin. The clock on the wall clicked to a new minute and held. The driver stared at the screen with a concentration that looked like he was trying to memorize an answer to a question he hadn't known the test would ask. Logistics took a breath that made his shoulders lift and fall. Compliance rested his pen on the notebook and let both sit their heads down for a moment. The door opened, and a woman in a charcoal blazer stepped in, carrying a thin laptop and the kind of calm that suggests she has been in rooms where larger storms were asked to rearrange themselves. She introduced herself as compliance from corporate and apologized for the delay with the kind of apology that recognizes a clock without worshiping it. She asked where we were in the review, and the local compliance officer gave her the quick architecture: facts gathered, clocks aligned, documents printed, video prepared, policies in hand, route details on the table, no conclusions drawn. She nodded, and I liked the way she listened to the verbs. We began again, not for drama, but for fairness. Maya played the minute before, the minute after. Corporate compliance watched without changing her breathing. She asked to see the call log photo. She asked to see the policy page. Jenna handed her the highlighted copy, and she ran an index fingernail under the line about hand-to-hand transfer for sensitive items, as if to feel it twice. She put the paper down and looked at the driver in a way that held him without pinning him. She asked if the building door required a fob. The manager answered yes. She asked if the driver had access. He shook his head once. She wrote a small note on a small card the same color as her blazer.
We closed more small loops. The building admin's email pinged Maya's laptop again with a second assurance that the clip would remain accessible and a contact name if additional footage was needed. Maya read it for the room. Logistics received confirmation that the route's stop duration at my address was indeed under a minute. He said he could provide a reducted version of that record if necessary. Corporate compliance said a summary would suffice for now. The supervisor placed a blank form on the table titled Corrective Action Draft and uncapped a pen and looked at no one because her job right then was to be ready, not to jump. I felt the day change key, not to victory, but to something steadier. The subplots had stopped rattling. The building had kept the door open in the way that matters. The store had opened this room. The policy had been admitted into the conversation where the word required has its original weight. The folder on my forearms breathed with me. Maya's spreadsheet had more checks than empty squares. The line I had drawn for myself in the lobby now ran across this table with room for other hands to rest on it. Corporate compliance suggested a brief break before final review so everyone could reset their eyes and so she could confer with her colleague about the scope of what they would document. The manager checked his watch and said he would be back in 10 and asked Jenna to keep the front steady. Logistics said he would text his office that the review was continuing and that he would be unavailable until it concluded. The driver stood and stretched his fingers as if he had been carrying something heavy, then let his hands hang at his sides. I stood too, not to impose my body on the room, but to remind my knees that they still knew how. Maya asked if I wanted a sip of water. I did. The paper cup's rim tasted like cardboard sun. The fluorescent lights hummed in their thinner key. The whiteboard surface reflected the ceiling like a quiet lake. The conference table held our papers the way a patient holds a dressing, not as decoration, but as care. I let my breath slow to match the clock again. The day had moved from proving pain toward preparing to name it. And there is a difference that the body knows before the brain does. When everyone was ready, we sat again. The same seats, the same screen, the same calm. I placed my palm on the leather and felt it warm like a word that remembers its meaning, and I waited with my granddaughter beside me, the policy in front of me, and the room arranged for the honest work we had come to do. Corporate compliance asked for the lights to stay where they were, not dim like a movie, but steady like a workbench, and that small choice calmed me. She set her laptop beside the paper stack and said we would proceed in 3 passes: records, images, policy. No speeches, no blame to start, just the shape of what happened.
I rested my hand on the leather folder as if it were a shoulder that had carried my weight long enough. The local compliance officer read the route printout into the room in a low, even voice. Device ping at the building coordinates. Photo captured. Stop duration under 1 minute. Customer contact code marked not attempted. He circled that last code with his pen so softly the paper barely noticed. Logistics looked at his tablet and confirmed the entries with a nod that made his mouth a straight line. The driver's breath came a little faster, the kind you take when air turns to sand. I kept my eyes on the page and not on his face because I had no interest in building a theater on top of a truth.
Maya mirrored the first clip. The minute before showed the fob working for a neighbor, the door side open on a permission earned. The minute in question was as empty as I had felt standing at the glass. No figure, no box, just the faint reflection of the lobby and the chalk line outside where strollers had drawn their map. She slowed the frame and enlarged the corner so the time sat legible like a street sign. The minute after showed a woman entering with a backpack, the door blinking and welcoming. Corporate compliance asked to replay the central minute twice, then asked Maya to freeze the frame at 5-second intervals so the clocks and the stillness could stand in the same rectangle. The room made its own quiet decision. We were not watching a drama. We were measuring a gap. The policy page came next. Jenna's highlighter had left 2 thin bars of yellow, like caution tape around a doorway. Sensitive items require hand-to-hand transfer with identity verification. If recipient unavailable, return for secure pickup. Corporate compliance placed that sheet on top of the tracking printout where delivered smiled in the wrong voice. She pressed an index finger on the word required, like a person testing a board before stepping. She asked me to confirm what secure meant in the context of our building. I said secure meant beyond the glass, not pressed against it. She asked the manager to confirm the door required a fob. He did. She wrote these confirmations down in tidy strokes as if they were bricks and would need mortar. She then addressed the driver, not hard, not soft. She asked him to describe the spot where he took the photo. He said, the step by the glass, leaning in so the app would catch a reflection of the door, because the app, he said, likes confirmation. She asked if he waited for a person. He said he knocked and waited a few beats. She asked if his device recorded a contact attempt. He said it should have, but maybe it didn't because the morning was running fast. She asked if he had access to the building. He shook his head. She asked if he had ever received guidance about buildings like these where a photo could stand in for a handshake. He said drivers share tricks, not guidance. His voice didn't crack. It landed flat like a package on the wrong table. The store manager leaned forward, elbows narrow and careful, and said for the record that the store's practice for sensitive deliveries was clear and had been shared with their delivery partners. Hands to hand, identity checked, otherwise returned to store. The supervisor added that closing a ticket to archive while a customer stood in front of them with proof of absence had a way of sealing a door that needed to be opened. She didn't apologize yet. She was careful to let the line complete its shape. Corporate compliance drew a small rectangle on a notepad and wrote inside it, in letters neat as tiles, deliver or return, and then placed the note on top of the policy page like a label made for children to read.
She asked logistics whether the system could be modified so that when a driver marked delivered at an address tagged as controlled access and the item was flagged sensitive, the app would refuse the green check without a capture of either a signature or a store intake scan. Logistics said yes, eventually, after configuration and testing. She asked if a human could make that adjustment today in the form of a directive pending the system change. He said the directive could go out today. He looked at the driver when he said it, and then looked at me. The local compliance officer picked up a form titled Corrective Action and began to write aloud, not to perform, but to keep the room honest. Retraining of driver on sensitive item policy, immediate instruction to route on hand-to-hand requirement, temporary removal of driver from sensitive item routes pending completion of training, adjustment of store-level process to require that any delivery marked at a controlled access address without a signature triggers a verification call from the store before archiving. The pen scratched like rain on a screen door. He added a line about amending the record from delivered to undelivered, pending reissue through secure pickup with identity verification.
I felt the breath leave me in a soft sound I didn't mean to make. It wasn't relief yet. It was the body recognizing a path where there had been only walls. The driver shifted and finally spoke without being asked. He said he'd been told to keep pace, that a minute here and a minute there meant the difference between finishing before the afternoon traffic jams children against curbs. He said he shouldn't have marked it delivered. He said he followed the app because sometimes the app feels like a boss with a second voice. He looked at the table when he said it. I looked at the policy page because I prefer to answer to paper in rooms like this. Corporate compliance didn't scold him. She said pace is a reality, not an excuse, and sensitive items make their own pace. She said they would handle the consequences through training and assignment. She turned to me and asked what, in this moment, I needed besides the corrective action. I said I needed my medication in my hands through the process the policy describes, with my name checked and my card presented. I said I needed the record corrected because the record had tried to rename me as the kind of customer who misremembers and complains about ghosts. I said I needed to know that the next person with a folder like mine would not be told that a photo knew them better than a handshake. My voice didn't rise. It had weight enough without volume. The store manager said he could authorize immediate reissue for secure pickup with identity verification and documentation. He asked the supervisor to start the process. She left the room with a purposeful, quiet step that told me she had done this kind of repair before. Logistics said he would open a ticket with his operations team to adjust alerts on the driver app for controlled access addresses and flag my building as such. Corporate compliance wrote a line about reviewing the default phrasing in customer messages so secure meant what the dictionary meant, not what convenience meant. Maya slid our spreadsheet forward and pointed to the empty square next to the promise of a call from the delivery company. She didn't say a word. Corporate compliance saw the square and understood its language. She said calls should not be promised and then missed. If silence will be the answer, the system must say silence is the answer, not we value your patience. She asked the local compliance officer to add a point about customer communication to the corrective action. He did in his square hand, the letters lining up like a quiet fence. The supervisor returned with a small tray, a sealed bag with the reissued medication, a form for identity verification, a separate form acknowledging that the prior record would be amended, a clipboard with a new incident number that would link to the closed one like a bridge. The bag made a soft whisper when she set it down. The room didn't cheer. The room rearranged itself around the task of doing it right.
She asked for my ID. I presented my state card, the edges worn smooth by a life that takes you through lines. She checked my name and address, asked me to sign, watched the pen make the shape of me on the line. I placed my senior card on the table and slid it next to the ID like a reminder of the public promise we make to one another. The cashier, who had been standing in the doorway, ready to fetch a label or a signature, stepped forward with a stamp. The stamp thunked and left a date. The sound was small and clean. The store manager watched the steps without hurrying them. Logistics' tablet glowed with a new screen where he entered a status change. Corporate compliance wrote the time beside the words, "Reissue executed according to policy."
The driver hadn't moved. He looked at the forms like a person peering through glass at the dinner they wished they had learned to cook. He said, "I'm sorry," not to the room, but in the direction of paper, and the apology landed in the only place I could accept it. I told him I understood the pressure of paces, and I told him that sometimes a pace is another person's breath. The words didn't sting him. They rested the way you rest a palm on a shoulder, firm enough to be felt, but not hard enough to bruise. Corporate compliance noted that he would be scheduled for retraining before being allowed to resume sensitive deliveries. Logistics added that his team would circulate a memo before end of day, clarifying that photo confirmation is a record of presence, not proof of transfer, and is not valid under controlled access for sensitive items. The supervisor asked if I wanted a private area to review the medication bag and confirm the contents. I said the table was fine. We were not performing a miracle, only a procedure. She read the label aloud and matched it to my name and dosage. I read it back. That call and response felt like a church I still believe in. She asked me to sign a final line indicating receipt. I signed. The ink dried in an instant because the air was that kind of dry. The room exhaled in small ways, the scuff of a chair moving, the click of a pen, while my chest held still, listening to the feeling that arrives when a ritual returns to its shape. Corporate compliance turned to the corrective action form. She read it aloud, each item clear. Driver retraining completed within 7 days. Temporary reassignment away from sensitive item routes until retraining documented. System directive issued today requiring signature or store intake scan for all sensitive deliveries to controlled access addresses. Store-level verification call requirement before archiving any sensitive delivery tagged delivered without signature. Communication protocol updated to remove attempted contact when not attempted. Record amended from delivered to undelivered, then to secure pickup completed with identity verification. Memo to all routes clarifying the limits of photo confirmation. Periodic audit of a sample of deliveries against building access rules. She asked the local compliance officer to sign. He did. She asked the manager to sign. He did. She asked me to countersign as the customer acknowledging receipt of the plan, not responsibility for its cause. I signed. My signature looked exactly like it always does. Stubborn, legible, mine. Maya put a small check in the square beside the promise she had been holding for me since the lobby. She looked at me and didn't smile yet. She knows that victory is a word you use carefully around elders who've learned that some victories just even the floor. I squeezed her hand under the table, grateful for the bones that connect us. The store manager apologized to me formally, not as a performance, but as a ritual of accountability. He said the store regretted the archive and the drop of our responsibility in the place where attention should have been. He offered a waiver of the delivery fee going forward for sensitive items and a direct contact number for the counseling desk if future issues arose. I accepted the apology and the number. I told him my hope was that the next person with tremor in their chest would find their medicine at their door or at this counter without having to build a case to breathe. Corporate compliance looked around the room and asked if anyone had anything to add that would make this plan more honest. Logistics asked if the building could provide a generic letter about access rules so they could attach it to addresses like mine as a flag. The manager said he could request it from the property management office. Maya offered to email a redacted version of the building's door policy that named no one and explained the mechanism. The supervisor said she would place a laminated copy of the sensitive delivery policy at the consultation window and the pickup counter so customers and staff could point to it together when needed. The driver kept his eyes on the form. He nodded once, as if to say he had heard orders and would carry them.
The bag in front of me weighed almost nothing, but the sight of it steadied me in a way that had more to do with process than contents. I thanked the room in the same tone I use when a bus driver kneels the bus to meet my needs. Not grateful to be allowed, grateful to be met. The lights hummed. The leather under my forearms felt warm, then warmer, then unnecessary. I slid the folder closed and fastened the strap. The soft click sounded like a period. No one rushed me out. Corporate compliance asked the supervisor to send me a copy of the corrective action by email, and then she signed her own name, neat and final. The manager walked me to the door and said if I ever felt unsure about a delivery outcome, I could come straight here and they would verify before words like archive and resolved were allowed to touch my name again. Jenna lifted a hand from behind the counter without leaving her post. The cashier at the entrance smiled that small, real smile people give when they've seen a room do something other than defend itself. Maya walked with me to the consultation alcove so I could put the bag in my backpack. We said little. There are whole conversations you have with the sides of your shoulders when you've known a person as long as I've known the shape of her care. The paper cup from earlier sat empty on the table. I crushed it once, the cardboard soft and forgiving, and dropped it in a bin. The motion felt like ending, not in a cinematic sense, just in the way a body tells the truth of a day back to itself. At the threshold, the driver stepped forward, cap still low. He didn't lift his eyes all the way. He said he would do the training and that he understood the difference now between a photo and a transfer. He said he understood it before, he guessed, but he understood it with his hands now. I told him understanding with your hands is the only kind that holds. He nodded and stepped back into the room where his name would be inked today and then retaught, and the door behind him swung softly, as if it had learned something too. We crossed the tiled floor together. The automatic doors breathed us out. The air smelled brighter. Cars slid by with their usual impatience. A bus kneeled and lifted. I felt my chest unfurl, not like a flag, but like a person standing up from a chair that had been too small. The folder under my arm weighed what leather weighs. The bag in my backpack made a gentler weight. Maya touched the strap to see that it sat right and checked the zipper and then let the strap go. Her hand was warm and alive. Mine was, too. I didn't speak a blessing over the sidewalk or turn the day into anything it wasn't. We had come into a room with cameras and papers and policies and asked those things to serve the people they were written to protect. They did because we insisted. That's not a miracle. It's a standard, and the standard is the only miracle I trust. I breathed, and the breath went where it was meant to go, and I heard my wife's old counting in my head, slow and exact. And then it faded, the way good guidance fades when it's no longer needed to hold you up. What failed was fixed, not by favor, but by rule restored. A photo can show a moment. Only a person can honor a promise. If you valued this story, please like, subscribe, and tell me in the comments what you would do in my place. Until the next story.